Hi Flosstube. Back in video number 5, last fall, I showed you my house and garden sampler. And I had several people contact me thinking about making their own and asking some questions. So I thought it would be fun to make a video on how I made my house and garden sampler, how I went about it, so that maybe you could make your own, because it would be a wonderful, wonderful heirloom piece. It just brought such great joy to me every time I look at it because it is so personal, and I just thought maybe I could share that with you so you could make one as well. So here's the sampler. If you want to hear the whole story about what each house means to me, go back and watch video number 5. Today I'm going to focus on how I made it so that you could make one. Hopefully you can see the whole thing. It's kind of big without the glare. I'll hold it up close. You can see it a little better. So back in, I don't know, somewhere around 2007-ish maybe, I belonged to the Legacy Embroiders Guild chat board. And they had an activity on that chat board called the House and Garden Sampler. It was going to be a round robin. So they put together groups of 9 people, and they each stitched part of it, and it got mailed around until it was all done. And the premise was that, I don't remember if it was 9 people. The one I printed off at the time and printed out, I think, was 9 people. It could have been more, it could have been less, just however many houses you wanted in your sampler. And the premise was that each person would stitch a house, garden area, so that you would have 9 houses on there, all stitched by a different person. And they got to, you could say maybe you liked certain color schemes, but they basically got to pick the pattern that they put on there. And I printed out ages ago. I loved it so much that one of them that made it all the way around to all the different stitchers and came back, so it was finished, and they posted a picture on the Legacy chatboard site. I printed it out because I just, sorry, I'm not holding that very still. I don't know how well you can see it, but that was one that was finished and came back. And I fell in love. I just thought, I have got to make one of these for myself. I didn't want to do it as a round robin. I wanted to make one where I stitched the whole thing. And I had the idea that I wanted the houses on there to mean something to me. So I decided that I was going to do 9 houses, 3 rows of 3, and that each house was going to be one of, sat down and made a list. If I had to make a list of the 9 most important buildings in my life, what would they be? And so I made a list and decided those were the 9 buildings that I was going to put on my sampler. So I got started, and that was, it was kind of daunting. First I made a list. Then I thought, well, I'm going to need some graph paper. I didn't think that I was going to be able to find a picture already designed out there, a house that looked just like each one of these houses. So I realized that I was going to have to do a little bit of designing, but I'm not a designer. So I figured the rest of it, what they did on this round robin was, they didn't make these up. These were just patterns. They just chose a pattern already designed out there of a house. And sometimes they combined different patterns. Maybe they put they put the house from this pattern, but they added a tree from a different pattern. It's just a mishmash of a whole bunch of different designs. So I figured I can do that. So I started out with my list of houses, and I started out with graph paper. And I figured, well, my Hawk Run Hollow designs, that's about the same-ish size, and those squares are about 92 by 92. So I thought, okay, each square is going to be 100 by 100. So I made my little packet of graph paper. It was 8.5 by 11, and it wasn't quite big enough. So I had to cut 2 pieces of graph paper and tape them together to make it be big enough to be 100 squares by 100 squares. So I just knew that each square was going to be about 100 by 100. And if I were doing this from graph paper and just stitching as I go, not designing it on a computer first, I would baste your fabric first. Decide, okay, each square is going to be about 100 by 100 squares, and go ahead and baste lines so that you have, however your layout you're going to be, 3 by 3 by 3, 3 rows of 3. Go ahead and baste those lines so that you can see that you have 9 squares that are 100 squares by 100 squares each, or whatever size you decide to do, so that you can see those. And then I thought, well, okay, I don't want the house to be right in the middle of each square on every one, because that would be kind of repetitive and boring. And looking at the ones that they did, I realized that the houses kind of moved around. They didn't always put them right in the center. And I liked that look. I liked that it kind of, they weren't all exactly the same. So I thought about on each square, the very first thing I did was just draw the house and decide where it was going to be. So this, most of the houses, if they were houses that existed right now in my life that I could easily drive to, I actually drove there and I took a photograph from the angle that I thought was the best. If it was a house from my past that I didn't have couldn't go visit, wasn't there anymore, or was too far away, I found an old photograph. I was lucky and was able to find an old photograph. So this is my grandparents' house on North Temple in Salt Lake City, right close to the Salt Lake City airport, because my grandpa worked at the Salt Lake City airport. So I found this picture, and I found this picture. These are my grandparents, my father's parents. He was an airplane mechanic and worked at the airport. And then this is my father and his friend, I believe, unless that's his younger brother, out in front of the house as well. So I took an actual, I'm not an artist, really not. So I just took a photograph of the house and figured I'm just going to do easy salt box houses like you see at on the Hawk Run Hollow pieces, that primitive style, just an easy square salt box house. It just needs enough detail for me to figure out so that I could recognize what house it was. And sometimes that depended on what part of the house, it doesn't have to look exactly, but maybe I really loved the red front door, or I really loved the windows in the, I made sure that the part that meant something to me showed. So of this house right here with my grandparents, I drew a house on graph paper that looked like this. I just started with a basic shape. It does have these really interesting, the corners of the house are, I don't know what the word is. You can kind of see it up here on the top of the roof line. The roof doesn't go like this. It kind of has these cut edges on it. I'm sure there's a word for that. I just don't know what it is. In architectural design, there's a word for that. So I tried to capture that in the shape of the house up here, where it kind of goes out and then down. I made sure I had the attic windows in there because it was a funky attic that had just been added into the attic space with these little windows, and we played up there when I was very young. I remember those. The front porch, I remember swinging. There was 2 black poles right here that came down into a flower bed, and there was always little flowers, and we would swing out on those poles, swing out and around. And my grandmother got mad at us because we were hurting the flowers. So I made sure those were on there. That lamp out front, I remember that, so I made sure the lamp was on there, and their address, because it had a little sign hanging on it with their address. So is every detail of the house on there? No, just the parts that I remember that meant something to me and were just the basic shape of the house. So see how simplified that is? And I didn't just draw it right off. I played around with it for a little while with my eraser and my pencil. No, it's too big. No, it's too small. How big do I want it? How much of this? I tried to make them not all the same size in proportion to the square. Not every house is going to take up most of the square. Maybe some of them will be smaller from a distance. Some will be closer and it'll be bigger. I just tried to vary them. I didn't worry about it too much. I didn't make a plan. This one's going to be big. This one's going to be little. I just tried to, if I had just drawn 3 of them big, then I tried to make some of them small. Don't worry about it too much. Just get started. Don't get lost in the details. Just start drawing. You can see that he had a garage in the backyard where he worked on cars, because he worked at the airport as an airplane mechanic, but of course he also worked on cars at home. Had 2 jobs. And it was back, you had to drive down a long driveway to get to it in the backyard on the side of the house. The driveway went right down the side of the house to that garage. So I just drew a small, easy shaped garage in the back with the door open. And I Googled the outline of an old-fashioned car. I didn't just make it up. I Googled it to see if I could find a simple shape of an old-fashioned car from the 40s that it showed in that garage. And then I made some, you can see that I made some notes on it, what colors. On the houses, I wanted the houses to be the color that they were, that I remembered them being. Maybe if they've been repainted since I made them the color that I was as a child. So you can see on this, especially in this, this house is white. But looking at a photograph, not in person, but I can do it a lot better when I'm looking at a photograph. And if you look at Hawk Run Hollow or any of the primitive style salt box houses, they don't use the same color on the whole house. It is a red house, but this part right here where the sun is shining on it is white because the house is white. But this part right here where it's shaded by the porch is going to be some gray color. And this part over here that's also recessed back a little bit is not going to be that bright white. It's going to be a gray. So you can see in mine, let's see if we can do this. I made the front white because the house is white. And where the porch shaded it was darker. So I made that a darker gray. And where the house is just back a little bit, but not back as far as that, not shaded with a roof or anything, I made it a medium gray. And then the roof, I chose a darker gray. I didn't worry about color families. I just started picking colors. Got my DMC boxes out and just said, okay, I need a medium gray, I need a darker gray. I really didn't worry about it too much because it was just for me. So I just chose what color I thought it looked like to me. I didn't worry about whether the colors went together. If they looked good to my eye sitting next to each other, then they're good. That was all I cared about. So I had 9 pieces of paper, and that was the very first. All I did was put the house on each one. That's how I started. I decided what order they were going to go in. What my house that I live in right now is right in the middle, and I knew that. And my in-laws are on one side of me, and my parents' house are on the other side of me. That's the middle row. And then I had to decide how I wanted to order the rest of them. Didn't really matter. Whatever makes you happy. And so each one, I drew the house first on the graph paper. This is our cabin at Strawberry River. Again, I started with a photograph. I tried to tried to look at it, kind of, squint your eyes and go from a photograph and just go, what is the basic shape of that building? That's all I want, is the basic shape. And I did that for ignore everything else that's on it. Just pretend that on each one of these pieces of graph paper, all I had was the house. And I tried to vary where the house was. This is my local church that I go to every Sunday. So that one I kind of moved up to the top of the square and over to the right. This one is my in-laws' house. I moved it, made it smaller, doesn't take up near as much of the square, and I moved it over to the side. This is my grandmother's cinder block. It's just a square cinder block house. That's all it is. It was easy to draw. But I've had people contact me and say, oh, my houses would be boring. All I've done is live in apartment buildings. Well, think about what do you remember about that apartment building? If you want to do the whole big building of apartments from a distance, because it was that's what you remember about it. As you walked up to it, it was this shape. Maybe you only want to do the side of it where the door is that you went in to get to up to your apartment. If you had your own separate door in a attached line of attached houses, then just do the front view of your door at that place. If it's in an inside hallway where you can't see it, maybe you want to just do a picture of the hallway, your door in the hallway, and let that just be by itself with not a hard edge around it, just fade it off somehow in that one. I mean, make they do not have to be pretty buildings. What it is your memory. What do you remember about that building? Do you remember that your apartment building was right next to a little corner grocery store, or that your apartment building there was a beautiful tree outside? Then make the basic shape of the outside of that apartment building and put a tiny little square building next to it that looked like the grocery store. Decide what your basic memory is of that place and choose what parts of it you want to remember. And they do not have to be realistically accurate either. My grandmother's house, that was pink cinder block, had two decorative pine trees, the kind that people put right in front of their house and they shape them. It had two right in front of the house. Well, I wanted to be able to see the house. So I took artistic license and I put those trees on either side of the house. That's not where they are in real life. They were right here in front of the house, but they would have blocked most of the house. And I could have done that. That would have looked okay. I could have put them right there. But I chose to put them on either side. When I see those trees, I remember those trees and I remember what they looked like. It means something to me, but it doesn't have to be exactly how it was. Those grapes across the top of her house, those were on the fence in the backyard. From this view of the front of her house, you'd never be able to see those grapes, ever. And they'd be tiny. From this tiny little house, you wouldn't even be able to see those grapes from this view. So I chose to make some vine that went clear across the top of the house and have those beautiful purple grapes hanging down, because I remember playing in the backyard and picking those. They were Concord grapes, so they were way too sour to eat. You couldn't eat them. But oh, did we pick them and squish them and get our fingers purple? Oh yes, we did. So that was an important memory for me from that house. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself, but you see what I mean. Just get the basic. This one, the Mount Timpanogos Temple, which I can see if I look out the window right here, it's far away. I chose to make that tiny, up on a hill. In real life, it's down in, you'd be able to see houses all along here. It's in a suburban area with houses all, it does have, I did match, if you are on I have to think about which way is which. If you're on the west side of that temple, looking back towards the mountains that are to the east of me, it was important to me that skyline matched. So I did make these mountains match if you're on the west side of the temple looking what that would look like. But in the front of the temple, if you were looking that direction, would be a bunch of houses and a bunch of... I chose not to put that in. I chose to make it very tiny on top of just nothing right here. And then I did match because the mountains were important to me. The mountains are not important to you behind a building, then don't put them in. Just leave it out. But see how I made that one tiny in the distance. So I didn't make them all the same size. Okay, on the middle block, I actually took to my house, just to be a little more different. I kind of wanted to have this tree be the centerpiece. I love trees, love trees. See how that big tree is almost right in the center? I decided I wanted the tree in the center and my house just off to the side. Well, that seriously went into this block over here. And I just did that because it was an idea I had, and I thought, oh, I want to do that. That would be cool because it's my house and trees are important to me. Trees are very important. So I taped these two pieces together, realized that the tree was going to take up most of that one. The house was going to kind of go across 2 blocks, and then my parents' house was going to kind of be squished over to the side of this block. So you can do that as well, just to be different. Or don't. If that stresses you out, then don't do that. But I kind of knew from the beginning that I wanted a tree right in the middle, because trees are very important to me. If you want your house right in the middle, or maybe your most favorite thing is the house you grew up in, then put that right in the middle. Or maybe there's something about, maybe the garage, maybe there's something about that property that you loved where you grew up or somewhere, then put that right. You know, decide what's most important to you and decide what you're going to have right in the middle, and then decide how you're going to place things around it. So that was all I did, was I had 9 pieces of graph paper that were 100 squares by 100 squares, and the very first thing I did was draw the house on the graph paper. And they're not taped on, so I actually drew the house. Oh, this one is. See, I drew this house on a separate piece of graph paper and then cut it out and taped it onto this piece. So you could do that as well. Draw them somewhere else, and then just, so you can move them around. Maybe you'd like to, which really helps me. I mean, that would have been a fabulous idea. Make your 10, your 9, sorry, I keep saying 10. Your 9, if you're doing 9 squares, if you're not, ignore that number. Put your 9 pieces of paper out, draw all your houses on separate graph paper, cut them out, and then move them around. I am not a good design in my head person. I need to touch it and move it. So I would have been moving those houses around and deciding, oh, I actually am going to redraw this one a little smaller, or I'm going to redraw this one a little bigger. But I placed the houses first. Okay, so then when I knew where the houses were going to be, then I started to really think about what memories do I have of that building, or what about that building am I emotional about? What do I have strong emotions about that building? Why is it important to me? What memories do I have? And I chose those first, and I made a little list of 2 or 3 things on each building that were an integral part of my memory of that building or my experience with that building. And I made sure that I added that first. Something about it that was interesting. And it, like I said, it doesn't have to be like the grapes. It doesn't have to be where it really was. It's just an important memory to me that I wanted on there somewhere. So that was the next thing I did and decided. And I started looking through, I looked through all of my magazines. I have lots of cross-stitch magazines over the years. I went through all of them and put a little sticky note by anything that I thought I could use. Oh, that's a cute tree. Oh, that's a cute bush. I didn't worry about color schemes. I didn't worry about size. I mean, obviously I knew it had to be about, you know, this big. It couldn't be this big, but anything I saw that I liked, it was the only criteria. Did I like it, or did it remind me of some memory that I wanted on that piece? I just put a little sticky note on it, and I went through all of my magazines and all of my patterns. And then there were some things I was missing, like at this river, our cabin at Strawberry River, which burned down. So sad, last summer. It's not there anymore. We still have the property and we'll rebuild, but this cabin is now burnt to the ground. It is right next to the Strawberry River, within, 40 feet. You can sit on the porch and watch the river go by. We call it the Strawberry River Cabin. It's in my family, you just say in my family, we just say we're going to the river, and everyone knows what we're talking about. But it's the Strawberry River. So I knew I wanted a river right next to the house. And in this case, I wanted it on the side of the house where it would be, and to show how close it is right to the cabin. But I didn't want to design a river. I'm not a designer. I designed the house. That was as much as I was going to do. And I didn't see anything in any of as I looked through all my patterns that I liked. So I got on Google and did a search for cross-stitch pattern river and just started looking at patterns. Well, I found this one by Bent Creek, Cabin in the Woods. And I thought, ooh, I like that river. That would work. I really like that river. I didn't copy this river exactly, as you can tell, but I used it to do as an idea to do this part. And then when I got down to here, I just kind of made it meander a little bit. It doesn't do that in here. But that's where I got this river from. And then I added a couple little fish in it because it's a trout, it's a blue ribbon trout river. So my dad's a fisherman. He's fished up there all my life. And we eat trout at the cabin for dinner all the time. That was my favorite thing. Fresh caught trout, deboned, breaded and fried. Oh, so good. So there had to be fish in the river. So I added fish in the river. Those grapes. I knew I wanted Concord grapes at my grandmother's house. I knew I did. So I just searched for patterns with Concord grapes in them, and I found this Prairie Schooler one. I can't remember if it actually came up or if I just happened to see it. I don't know if it would come up if you searched grapes. I might have already owned it. I don't remember. But I saw those grapes in that. This is Prairie Schooler VWX, their alphabet series, and it is V for vineyard. And I took the grapes right off of that pattern and put them, looked at how, I thought, ooh, I love those grapes. Ooh, I kind of look how it goes over the top of the picture. Ooh, I could put it right across the top of my grandmother's house. So that's what I did. I just made the vine a little bit longer so it would fit. At the tiny little cabin we have at Bear Lake right here, there's these trees that grow in the back. It's a bush really, but when it gets big enough you can prune it to look like a tree. It has a distinctive shape, and I saw this pattern, Seaside Cottage. I was searching, I think I did a search for seaside cottages or cottages by the lake or something like that, and found this picture. Saw those trees, loved how they look. They look just like that. It's not, I'm sure it's not the same kind of tree as that bush that's growing in the backyard. But it was the shape that made me remember what grows in the backyard there. And if you're looking at this, you wouldn't be able to see them because they'd be in real life. They'd be behind the house where you couldn't see them. So I put them on the side where I could see them, because those trees look like that huge bush that my dad let get really big and then pruned it. So they're like trees that shade the backyard a little bit. So colors. I did not have a color scheme. I did not choose a color palette. I just took whatever colors that pattern called for. I liked the color of these trees. They're very similar to that bush that grows in the backyard. So I just looked to see what those colors were, and that's what I used. I love the color of these grapes. They're the real color of Concord grapes in my memory. So I just looked to see what color was used there, and I used that color. On the houses, I looked at in the photograph of what color the house looked like to me. And for the lightest part of the house where the sun would be shining right on it, I found a color in DMC that from my memory or from the photograph was that color. And then I made the shaded part of the house, anywhere it would be in the shade, I just chose a darker color that looked like a darker version of that color was all I did on the houses. And all the rest of these, the trees and the bushes, I honestly just used like this tree right here. I found that in one of my magazines. I just used the colors that the pattern actually called for that tree. This made me laugh because it's Strawberry River, and I saw this little, it was a sample on a sampler somewhere with these strawberries hanging down. It looks like I'm sure it's supposed to be a strawberry plant. But in my picture, it's huge, as big as a tree. But because it's Strawberry River, it had to be on there. It had to be on there. I didn't try and make it smaller like a real strawberry plant. There are no strawberries that grow up there on our property. There probably is somewhere, or it wouldn't be named that, but I've never seen any up there on our property. But because it's named that, I had to have that little strawberry motif on there. And I love it. It makes me laugh. There are bears up there, so I just went out and found... I can't remember. I think when I was looking through all my magazines, I knew I was going to need a bear and a squirrel because we love to watch the squirrels up there, and we've seen bears a couple times. All right. So you get the idea. So then I placed the important memories. And then after that, you can kind of see this tree that I just showed you at my in-laws' house. I took the pattern from the magazine and I carefully sat there and drew just the outline of it so I knew how big it would be. And you could do that on a separate piece of paper, would probably be better. And then cut it out and decide where you're going to put that tree. about this point, I decided that I was losing my mind. You could, depending on your personality, you could totally keep doing it this way. Just, maybe you know that the tree, you don't even have to draw the exact outline. You just know that it's going to be this many stitches high and it's going to be this many stitches wide and it's going to fit right here. You've looked at how much space you're going to need to clear the house. Even if you don't clear the house, just make the house be in front of the tree and don't stitch that part. It is okay to just kind of place it and it's going to be fine. I see it as like a scrap sampler. It is not this was a memory for me, a memory piece, not a designed color palette piece. This was a memory, like when you have all of your grandmother's scraps of fabric and you decide to make a quilt with those scraps. You did not go to the quilt store and buy colors that go together or that all came in the same designer as a pack. You had scrap fabric in it, had a different meaning, and you put it together as a scrap quilt. That's what this sampler means to me. It is a scrap sampler of my memories. So I'm not worried about if the colors go together or not, because I figured it would be busy enough with different colors all over the place that it wouldn't matter. And I worried about it a little bit at the beginning. I thought, I don't know if this is all going to go together. But I looked at the ones that they did online, those ones I originally saw, and I realized there's no color scheme in that. There's no color scheme. People just stitched the house they wanted to stitch in the colors they wanted to stitch it. Probably what the pattern called for. And I loved the way it looked. I loved that it was just a whole bunch of houses put together that aren't designed to go together. Does that make sense? So you could totally stitch it in this order. You could decide where you wanted the houses and actually stitch the houses. Then you could choose some important memories on each block, or trees or grapes or the little dog that you loved at that house. Find a little dog that looks like that and put the important memories on somewhere where it makes sense to you. Doesn't have to look fabulous yet. Just put them. You could stitch that on next. You could actually do it this way. Or you could do it with graph paper where you're drawing just a basic outline or just some markers, like a line right here. You know the tree's going to be about this big, about here. Just some quick lines letting you know that this is about where the tree's going to be. And then actually stitch it from the magazine where you got the tree. Is that making sense? But for me and my personality, I got about to that point and it was starting to drive me crazy. So I decided to purchase PC Stitch, which I did. It's a software where you can design on the computer. And it took a really, really long time, weeks and weeks, for me to take this house with the colors that I had chosen. I can see on some of these that I had already chosen colors. Like on this house, I made a note that I wanted the garage door was white. The garage roof was needed to be a dark gray. This part up here was going to be a light gray. I had made some notes on here. Sometimes I had actually put what color I had chosen, like the DMC. And I sat there click by click. You have to click every square when you are designing on the computer. You're putting each stitch on as a click. And I had to click, I had to put each house on. And then I had to put, if I was pulling a tree out of a magazine, you would not have to, but for my personality, I've decided to actually design it on the computer. So I took the pattern from the magazine and I actually sat there with the pattern and went click, 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 and put every stitch of that tree on the pattern. Does that make sense? It took weeks and weeks and weeks. But like I said, you wouldn't have to. And you could design it from the very beginning on the computer. What I'm trying to say is you can do it either way. You could totally make this work on graph paper. If you're the kind that likes to design as you stitch, you could totally make that work as well. If it's driving you nuts and you need to have it all in a printed pattern to start with before you start stitching it like I am, then you can totally design it from the beginning in PC Stitch, however you want to do. PC Stitch is nice because if you put it somewhere and you later want to move it over a little bit or just need to move it down, you can select it, cut it, and move it. Just like on graph paper where you want to untape it and move it over a little bit. Either way would work, totally. Do not get hung up that you have to have a cross-stitch software pattern, or don't get hung up that you have to do it on graph paper if that's going to drive you insane. Do whatever works for you. It will work, I promise. All right, what's next? Okay, so I got to that point and put that all in on my computer or your graph paper, however you're going to do it. Well, then I needed some fill-in stuff. And I noticed that on these ones that they did, you know, one person would stitch this house and this some grass, and, you know, whatever they were going to put in the yard. Well, the next person stitched wherever the next person happened to stitch a house right next to it. You know, you're not going to just leave a gap between the two houses. That looks better if they kind of meander into each other. And I thought it was so cool that they made it, they figured out how to make theirs, you know, but right up against to the one next. Maybe they'd add a little fence, or they'd add a little tree, or they'd add an extra sheep so that it would meet the house next to it that had already been stitched. And sometimes, you know, they made it a diagonal line that kind of meandered into the next empty square so that it wouldn't look like it was lines. This is where this house stopped, and this was how this one started. That was one of the things that I was so impressed about this round robin, is that they flowed into each other seamlessly, even though that was 9 different stitchers stitching it at different times. So after I got my main features on in PC Stitch, this is the finished project. So this is not what it looked like at the time. At the time, it just had houses and some main features. That's all I had in there. Well, then I realized I needed to fill in with some bushes, some flowers, some trees. I kind of looked at where the holes were and what I could put in there. I am not a designer. I did not specifically say, oh, we need something tall here, or, you know, the rule of 3s, or we've got too much green over here, so maybe we need some red over here. I totally didn't do that. I just looked at it and said, looks a little empty right here. I think maybe I'll put a bush in right there. Maybe I'll put a tree in. I honestly didn't do a lot of thought about formal design. I just put in what looked good to me. That's all I did. I didn't fill in everything. I left space because I got tired of designing and was just like, oh, it's fine, I don't care. When I had all the bushes and trees in that I felt like I was either just too tired or I was done, then I realized that it needed something to anchor it to the ground. Everything was floating out in the air. And so I made these, with my mouse on the screen, and you could do it on graph paper, just draw. I just kind of, you know, took a color and just kind of went like this. And then I went back in and filled it in, because if you do that, you're just going to get this trail of, but I went back in and kind of clicked around and made it just kind of this. Then I added something over here, and then I added some grass that kind of came from that house down into this house. I added some, did the mountains behind. This one I just put little patches of grass, because it's not the mountains, it's not grass. Little patches of moss and stuff, I don't know. So on that one and the mountain behind, instead of filling it in like I did on this one, I just put the trees and left the mountain blank behind it. Did an outline and little trees on that one just to be different. But I just kind of filled in some, this is the beach, so I made it lines so it looked like the, you know, the kind of little hills on the beach, little dunes that it makes, tiny little dunes. And then the water. Just so they would be touching something next to them. Like this row all touches each other, this row all touches each other, and this row all touches each other. Because they'd be kind of on the same plane, the same piece of ground. You could fill this in much more. If you look at this one, it's a little more filled in some ways. And other places don't have grass or background at all. Just do whatever looks good to you. I loved how these all had, and I tried to just choose different colors. I didn't make all the grass, all that stuff that I filled in, I didn't make it all the same color. I just got out all the greens that I could find in my DMC box and just went, I think I'll do, And this is, at this point, I realized that I didn't want it to all be solid colors. That if there was a big block of a solid color, I would choose a overdyed or a variegated, like Weeks Dye Works or Gast. Because I didn't want to take the time to shade it with a bunch of different colors of DMC, but I loved that it had some color variation in big blocks. So for most of this grass, like this, this piece of grass right here is all one variegated color. And then I chose a different variegated color to do the house next to it so that you could, or maybe not, nope. These two colors are the same variegated color, but I did use a different color right here in the front, which is this color that goes up into here. This grass is just two different, I did a darker variegated color right here and a lighter variegated color right here. I just chose two, just looked through my stuff and found two colors I thought looked good together. These mountains, I purposely chose variegated colors so that the mountain would have a little bit of interest. I don't know. So it wouldn't just be a solid block of color. Anywhere where there was water, this Bear Lake is a beautiful teal blue. On a sunny day, it has something to do with the minerals that are in it, but it is a vibrant teal. And I knew I wanted it that color, and I chose a variegated color that I thought looked like my memory of it. And I actually started in the corner here and did stripes this way because I thought that would be more interesting than it would look more like water. Actually, I think I started, nope, I started in the corner, I can tell, and did this way so it would look more like, the stripes would look more like, follow the shape of the water. But not this roof. This roof is solid gray. Our church that's down on the corner here is kind of a sandstone color. And so I chose a beautiful variegated, overdyed, orangey color that would look pretty there. Other than that, all of my houses are solid colors, solid blocks of color. I was going to do several of the ones on Legacy had an alphabet with the house, and quite often when you have a house pattern it has an alphabet, and I love alphabets. I was going to do an alphabet to fill in some of the space. I was going to put in a whole bunch of alphabets, but then when I was almost done designing it, I was in my car listening to my favorite CD of the used to be called the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Now it is the choir at Temple Square. I'm trying to think. I was listening to their CD, and they were playing a song, singing a song called Gaelic Blessing, and it is an old Gaelic poem, I believe, that has been arranged into a song, and it's one of my favorite songs. And I had this idea, oh my goodness, instead of putting alphabets on that piece, I should put this song that means so much to me on there. That would just be fabulous. So then I thought, well, I wonder how long the song is. Is it going to work? And I got home and looked at my pattern and realized that I could fit a phrase of the song under each house, that I was going to make that work. So then I just went out and looked at a bunch of alphabets, chose one that was the right size, that would fit in the space of each house. And because I was doing it on PC Stitch, I could go ahead and just put that in. And I put it in over, I think I had already done the grass at that point, but I just put the letters over wherever they would fit. That was not a plan from the beginning. That was put in almost near the end of designing it. So you'll see that sometimes they fit under the house. Sometimes I put them up above the house in the sky, like this one over here, fit better up in the sky. I put them wherever it would fit. And it just happened to work out. It was fabulous. And then I realized that there were different verses of the different phrases in the song that went better with certain houses in this picture. So I actually moved the phrases around a little bit in the song just for personal preference, because there were certain phrases that meant something to me. Like this, my father was an airplane mechanic and worked at the Salt Lake Airport. And there's a phrase in the song that says, "Deep peace of the flowing air to you." And I just thought that would be so appropriate over here. And I put an airplane in the sky. there were phrases like that that I felt like needed to go with a particular house. So I did put them out of order just a little bit. And sometimes it didn't matter which house it was on, so I just left it where it was. And that was fabulous. Okay, so then I realized that I wanted to put the name of the house, or who in my family lived in that house. I wanted to put that on there somewhere, and I wanted a border to kind of fence it all in. And you could do a saying around the edge as your border. This one has a saying around the edge. I think it's in French maybe, so I can't tell what it says, but it runs around the edge, the top 3 sides. And I loved how that kind of finished it off. I felt like I needed a border on it. You don't have to do a border. Don't do one if you don't want to. And then I realized that would be a great place to put the names of the people who live in each one of these houses, whose home it was or what the name of the building is. And so I sat down on my PC Stitch. If you were doing this on graph paper, you could do it that way too. It would just take a little bit longer, I think. And it just, I found an alphabet that was I had to play around with alphabets for a little while to see what would fit and what wouldn't fit and how much space I had. And it just happened, I found one and it just happened to work out. So around the edge of each, like this cabin right here says the Johnson Cabin, Strawberry River. So I was able to, choose the words a little bit, play with the words of what would fit. This is my in-laws' house, so it says Dale and Neola Miles right here next to it. So I was on the ones that were the corner, I made it go around the corner. On the ones that weren't, it stayed right underneath. So I did that all the way around. I just did 1 row of cross stitch to make that inner border. Then I did the words. And then I happened to be driving down the road about this time I was designing this, and there was a house that I passed that had the most beautiful stone wall all the way around it in the most beautiful orangey sandstone color, just the most gorgeous stone wall. And where there was a door, it came and arched over, and the door was cut to be round, a wooden door. Beautiful, beautiful wall. And I just thought, oh, I love that wall. I wonder if I could put that on my sampler somehow. So I just went home, made up my own. I put these at the corners and then this in the middle of each side to kind of look like that doorway. And I just chose an over-dyed color that kind of looked like sandstone to me, put the little gray, I just made that up. And then I realized that in between I would love to have trees, because I just love trees and bushes. So I had a book, I believe it was a Brenda Keyes book, that had a whole bunch of sampler designs in it, things you could use in making your own sampler, and she had a whole bunch of trees in there. And so I just took a whole bunch of her trees, made them a line. It's exactly the same. If you look at this strip, it's exactly the same as this strip here and this strip here. It just repeats all the way around. So that's how I made the border. I did that at the very end. I should have planned that from the beginning, but I didn't. It just, don't worry about it. If it's going to keep you from starting on it because you can't figure out all these pieces, it's fine. You will figure something out at the end. You will see a border somewhere and go, oh, that border would work. That would be simple, and I could just put that around the edge and it would look good. Or maybe I just want the frame to border it. I don't need to put a border on it. Do whatever makes you happy. All right, let's see if I remembered all the things. Oh, and then I forgot, as I told you in video number 5, I forgot. I was going to backstitch my husband and I's name under our house right here, and then right here I was going to put established in the year it was built, because we didn't move in here until we had 3 kids. In 1993, we had the house built. We bought the lot and had it built, and I was going to put that on there. And then it sat forever before I got it framed. There were a couple of things on here I wasn't happy about, and I was thinking about ripping them out. I didn't like the way it looked. And it sat for, gosh, probably a year. And then my daughter Catherine and I were on our way to Salt Lake to the Craft Center of Fine Stitchery, where I knew I was going to get it framed. And I thought, oh, I really want to get that piece framed, completely forgetting that it wasn't done yet. And we grabbed it and took it up there, and I knew there was a couple of loose threads. And when I looked at the things that I hadn't been happy with, they looked fine to me. I looked at them and I was like, what was I so worried about? That looks fine. So I left them. And I had a trailing thread on one piece that I hadn't been happy with, but as we're driving, I told Catherine, I gave her, we had grabbed a needle on the way out of the house because I knew there was a trailing thread. Hide that thread on the back, fix it, because it's done, we're getting it framed. Completely forgetting that I hadn't put my name in the middle yet. So after video number 5, I had some people comment on some good ideas. Yes, I can have the framer take it apart, but it has been stretched and pinned, and I don't want to have to undo all of that. So there's fabric across the back and then lacing. It's been laced on the back. And I don't want to undo the lacing to get in there and stitch. But one of the suggestions was to have a little metal plate engraved at like a place that does trophies where they'll engrave the little, have a plate engraved and then have her take the glass off and I could just sew the plate on right here. And I thought that was a great idea. So I'm going to do that at some point to get my house on. Let me make sure I covered everything. I think that's all. I think you should just, if you are interested in making one, just start. Just start. Ideas will come to you. It'll be great. And when you run into a snag, talk to other people you know, get on Flosstube, comment on someone, ask me. I'm happy to answer questions. My email address is always in the description box below. I'm happy to answer questions. But this has meant so much to me. It was a long, long journey. It was probably a year or 2 maybe before I actually had the finished piece designed in PC Stitch, and then I started stitching it. There's probably 100 different colors in here because like I said, I just used the colors that were in each. I had them in a great big floss box. And then it took another 10 years for me to finish stitching it. It wouldn't have taken that long if I'd worked on it more often, but it did take a good 10 years for me to finish this project. But I will cherish it forever. It makes me happy every time I look at it. And I hope you are able to make one and start on one and find the same joy that I did. And I hope you have a fabulous stitchy day. Bye-bye.